Well, thanks for having me. I'm Mark Elsner. I'm the Water Supply Bureau Chief here at the South Florida Water Management District. And today I'm going to share with you some of the things that we've put in place along with water users to monitor and reduce the potential impact of saltwater intrusion. Next, please. Through the presentation, I'll be referring to our Lower West Coast planning area. This is one of 5 planning regions in the South Florida Water Management District, and it includes Lee County and portions of Collier, Glades, Henry, Monroe, and Charlotte counties. Next. As far as population and demand, currently we estimate there's about 1.2 million people living in the Lower West Coast region. This is projected to increase by about 36% from 2020 to 2045 to about 1.6 million people. Over that same period, on the graph on the right, water demands are projected to increase by about 14%, or an additional 125 million gallons a day. Next. And just to see the development and growth that we've had to address over the last 70 or 80 years. On the left is an image of Naples in 1940, and on the right is 2021. There have been a few changes over that period of time. Next. Okay. In Southwest Florida, a majority of the water used for public water supply does come from fresh groundwater systems in the superficial aquifer system and intermediate aquifer system. And the individual aquifers include the water table, lower Tamiami aquifer, sandstone aquifer, and mid-Hawthorne aquifer. Another important source is the upper Floridan aquifer, which is located at the bottom of the graph. And that is saline and requires reverse osmosis prior to use for irrigation or potable needs. And I will say that much of these freshwater systems have been maximized in the way of their allocation. So the majority of there has been significant alternative water supply development of the upper Floridan by the utilities. Next. The one thing I did want to mention also on that previous slide is that, those freshwater systems are susceptible to saltwater intrusion from the Gulf of Mexico. This is a little busy map, but this is a map of the public water supply well fields, and the names highlighted in yellow are representing the freshwater aquifers. And you can tell there's coastal as well as inland well fields. And there's others well fields that aren't highlighted, and those tap the upper Floridan aquifer, that brackish water aquifer I spoke about earlier, and you use reverse osmosis. But you can tell that with most utilities, they're either strictly Floridan aquifer, or in the case of Naples, they have a freshwater aquifer along the coast called the Coastal Ridge. But they also have an eastern well field called East Golden Gate. So that gives them the ability to switch pumpage during the wet and dry seasons and be able to rest those well fields, but also minimize the potential for saltwater intrusion. Other utilities like Bonita Springs, they have a freshwater well field as well as the Floridan aquifer well field. And again, gives them the ability to switch pumpage during dry conditions and depend more on the alternative water supply than the freshwater system. Again, minimizing the potential for saltwater intrusion. Next. So South Florida, we do have a multi-prong approach with the major components listed here. And it goes from the permitting of systems, in computer modeling, but also the actual monitoring to make sure that we're not getting different results than what was planned in those permits or in the modeling. And the rest of this presentation will focus on going through these different items. Next. In Florida, water is a public resource, and except for wells that serve individual homes, all other uses require a permit from the Water Management District. There's a lot of criteria that must be met to get that permit. And one of those is meeting saltwater intrusion criteria and given a reasonable assurance that and demonstrate that harmful saline water intrusion will not occur. You know, that goes in the location of the wells, but also the operations, like I was telling you, those that have coastal and inland well fields, and showing how between the design and the operations that those will not contribute to saltwater intrusion. In addition, these permits also require a groundwater monitoring program to monitor the potential intrusion of salt water, and all that is reported back to the district. Next. This area is an all-star when it comes to alternative water supply development. On the left are public water supply facilities using brackish groundwater. Currently, there's 14 of them with a total capacity of about 144 million gallons a day. And you can see many of those are located along the coast, which again minimize the potential for saltwater intrusion. On the right is a map showing the reclaimed water pipelines of the utilities in that area. And they're currently using about 84 million gallons a day. And that's reducing the demand on those freshwater aquifers and along the coast, providing some recharge. Next. This map shows public water supply pumpage from the different aquifers. And the light blue and the gray show pumpage from the freshwater aquifer systems, the superficial and intermediate aquifer system. And the darker blue shows use of the Florida aquifer system. And something interesting to note here is that over the last decade, use of the superficial and intermediate combined hasn't really increased. Any increases in pumpage is coming from the Florida aquifer system. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that a lot of the freshwater aquifers have been maximized in the way of their allocation. And the future needs are going to have to be met by alternative water supplies. And for public water supply utilities, that is the upper Florida aquifer. Next. A lot has been talked about today about surface water and stormwater management. And just as the other presenters have talked about, it's really important regarding water supply. You know, and that over drainage reduces the available water for use, and not enough drainage could be cause flooding and things like that. So it's a balance. And what much of the area has done over here is looked at their systems and either physically or through operations have managed that to maximize the amount of water in these systems during the dry season. And most of the systems over there do have operational plans that increase the water levels or try to maintain more water in those canal systems at the end of the dry season, into the wet season and going into the dry season. Cape Coral has installed variable weirs that allow them to adjust them for during the wet season and then during the dry season. And you can see, like a place like Big Cypress Basin, if you were able to increase water levels by 6 inches to a foot over that whole area, that's a tremendous amount of water providing recharge to the groundwater. You know, so surface water management is a big part of water supply and groundwater management, and reducing the potential for saltwater intrusion and keeping that freshwater head high enough to impede the movement of salt inland. Next. Another thing we do in the way of monitoring saltwater intrusion is we conduct saltwater interface mapping. And we started this in 2009, and we update these every 5 years. But the whole concept is to monitor the saltwater line, or the 250 milligram per liter chloride line in the aquifers across the district, and in this area, the lower Tamiami, Sandstone, and Mid Hawthorne, and see if the position of the saltwater interface has moved. So on these maps, there are 3 lines there representing 2009, 2014, and 2019. And for the most part, you can see they're on top of each other, which shows that there's not a lot of movement of that saltwater interface line. But to look at those closer, I have included the links to the maps and the technical report if you wanted to dive deeper and look at a specific area. Next. Another tool we have in predicting the potential for saltwater intrusion, or just the impact of water use on our groundwater sources, is groundwater modeling. We have a model called the Lower West Coast Superficial and Intermediate Aquifer Groundwater Model that covers this area. And it's an excellent tool in the way of looking at regional trends and identifying impacts of future demand on those resources. This model was updated in 2019, and simulation runs were done in 2020. And those results are available on our website. This looks at groundwater levels, groundwater flow direction, and it's planned that we're going to update this to be able to look at water quality in the form of total dissolved solids, and be able to use it to look at changes in water quality in groundwater systems, and looking at the potential impacts of sea level rise on those groundwater systems in that area. Next, please. We know water or increase in demands are coming. And back in the 90s, the South Florida Water Management District started a water supply planning before it was required by statute. And since the mid 1990s, we've been updating our water supply plans about every 5 years in that area to stay current. You know, and over the last 10 years, it's testament why we need to stay current with the recession and the slowing of growth to the increase in growth that's occurring now. And basically, these water supply plans are a roadmap to how we're going to meet our future needs. They project out future needs, and we identify the sources and projects that are needed to meet those needs. We do at least a 20-year planning horizon. This current plan, the 2017, goes to 2040. And a plan that we just started an update on goes to 2045. We had our first stakeholder meeting a couple weeks ago, and we'll be having a couple other stakeholder meetings and plan to present the update to this water supply plan to our governing board in November. Next. So I think that in closing, the message I want to leave is one size doesn't fit all, and we all need to stay vigilant when it comes to saltwater intrusion. We have our planning and modeling worlds, but this has to be integrated with regular monitoring to validate predicted responses, and to what I say, keep your hands on the pulse. And that responsibility falls with the local folks, water management districts in the state, to do what we can to minimize that. And with sea level rise, that's going to provide new challenges. And we need to develop what those scenarios are, do the analysis, and put the projects in place to minimize the impact of that. And with that, I thank you for inviting me to present here, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. Yeah, are there desalination plants in Florida? Are there plans to build some, if not? And a majority of our brackish or desalination facilities do draw water from the upper Florida aquifer, which is brackish and requires reverse osmosis. In the way of a seawater desal, There aren't very many plans at this time. In our district, we have a couple that are used on an emergency basis in the Keys. And we also have the Tampa Bay Water Desalination Facility in Tampa. And, you know, that's ultimately a source we could go to. But, you know, the complexity in treating it and the cost increases. So we're not there yet, but that is a tool in our toolbox ultimately. How well do you think our fresh water will be able to keep up with the future demand? Through our predictive analysis, at least through 2045, it's not showing significant issues. That's without taking into account saltwater intrusion or sea level, not salt, sea level rise. So, you know, that's something that we will be looking at in our future groundwater modeling. Do you think we should be investing in RO to assure enough fresh water for our future population? How long in the future may we need it? We have started investigating in RO or investing in developing brackish water sources to the upper Florida. And we're going to need that forever. You know, what we're planning is for sustainable water sources to meet our current and future demands. And one thing that I didn't share is that, you know, with the, especially in this area, the huge dependence on the upper Florida, we actually have developed a Florida aquifer model to simulate the potential impacts of increased withdrawals on that system and water quality. And, you know, that was also run in 2020, and those results are available on our website. And that's a source that we need to manage also, because there's saltier water that lies underneath the fresher part of it. And we don't want to withdraw water at a greater rate than can recharge laterally, and we start pulling up that salt from below. Are there areas in Southwest Florida that will have more issues than others regarding saltwater intrusion and drinking water wells and issues with drinking water supply? I would say yes. Those coastal areas are closer to the salt waterfront, and you know, their susceptibility would be higher than somebody that's inland. And it was interesting, the presentation before about looking at the potential sea level rise and its effects on inland flow up the bays and the tidal creeks, which could potentially affect groundwater, and something we'll have to take a look at. Do you think there will ever be a point we can no longer keep up with the demand for water? Like I said, ultimately we do have the ocean, but on that one bar chart, if you noticed, population is increasing at a much significant rate than the water demand. So there is conservation occurring, and the per capita use is going down. We're building more efficient. You know, so the amount of water per person is not as great as it was 20 years ago. Can public water supply be augmented with treated wastewater? That's a good question. You know, in this area, most of your wastewater is being reused for irrigation. However, yes, wastewater can be treated for potable needs, both directly or indirectly. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection is currently under rulemaking, incorporating potable water reuse rules into their regulations, you know, to develop a framework on how that would occur in Florida in the development of potable reuse. That rulemaking started last year or the end of the year before, and is going on, and some of those, I think, that's projected to be finished late this year or next year. And that is being done in other places of the world successfully.
Well, thank you.